Okay, you now are starting into Module 2. You've gotten some feedback from me on your writing for Module 1. Overall, I was pretty happy with it. As you noticed, we have a dialogue. I hope you are as comfortable now with Canvas as I was with Blackboard, but things never stay the same. They move on. So we're now looking at a module that I am very comfortable with, given my own academic background. As most of you, the noise in the background, by the way, is my great-granddaughter. She's quite entertaining. I'm not going to expose you to her. That's left for me only. Okay. My other background as an academician was in the behavioral sciences. And I came out of a school of thought that there's an old fresh expression, what goes around comes around. And the structural functional model that I grew up with went away for a while. And it's come back. And you will hear a little bit from me. You'll hear a little bit later on, particularly if you go on to the doctorate, you'll hear about a postmodernist model. But the postmodernist model is now being modified and expanded under what is postmodernism in the structural sense, what is it in the functional sense. Okay, enough behavioral science. What we're talking about now is one of the best known African American scholars living and working today, talk too fast, a gentleman named James Banks. And Banks did something that I think is just very important because we've lost track of it. If you have ever been in the construction industry, you know you don't build a house from the second floor. You have to have a foundation. Well, Dr. Banks is one of the best that I know who talks about the structure in a way that gives you a tool. And the tool he calls cannons. And we don't mean the things that fired to start various wars in the 19th and 20th century. It really is the core of what is going on in the community college today, because these canons are universal, but their hierarchy of relevance tends to be something like a roller coaster, if you will. Okay, all right. The thing that's important, this goes back a little bit to the first module, and will be addressed again in the third and again in the fourth, and then you'll address it back to me when you do your synthesis in the fifth. And that is, the community college today is one of society's most complex multicultural environments. Banks talks about that issue when he talks about things like gender and age and ethnicity. And all of these are issues that we are wrestling with today as America changes. Now, we're not going to get political, but I was fortunate to grow up in an environment that was highly multicultural. The high school I went to was fully integrated. That was at a time that was caused predominantly by World War II. The community college I went to was even more so. And I was at a point in my career when I was too young to see the influx of veterans from World War II, but there was a large number of Korean War places. There really was, called a police action. Don't call it that in front of anybody who was there and saw combat, but that also brought a large dimension of multiculturalism to the community college. So I didn't realize this was not a universal issue, but it wasn't. And having been in the business now for over half a century, I'm not lying, I can see that in parts of this country it is not an issue that's well wrestled with. Okay, Banks approaches it first, as I said, from the canon environment, but then after that he takes it from a more personalistic point of view. And we're going to look at that one more carefully. One of the best known behavioral scientists operating out of the University of Denver, passed away tragically far too young, came up with a phrase: if you think about its implications, you're going to understand why multiculturalism is so important. What this gentleman said was, what you are now, or today if you prefer, what you are now is where you were when. We are all products of our life experience. And the broader your life experience, the more able you're going to be to deal with the issues of multiculturalism. And that's what we're trying to do at Morgan, to send out as diverse a cadre of well-trained leaders as is possible to create in the brief time we have with you. Yeah, I know your master's degree, my God, 2 years or a year and a half, doctorate 3 to 4. But that when you think that the average lifespan for males in this culture is approaching mid-80s and for women approaching mid-90s, that is a very short time, and you must be lifelong learners. Okay, so that's going to draw upon this insight as we look at community colleges trying to retain its historic role and not allow it to become too narrow. So please examine the algorithm. I love algorithms. I'm terrible in geometry, but algorithms tend to give me some insight that I enjoy. And there's one to be found in the Banks article on page 53. And see, as you look at it, trace your life experience through that algorithm. And I think it'll give you a context in which to draw upon those experiences. Some were neutral, some were bad, or some were good. That's human condition. And see how you can fit this in. It'll make you a much more effective leader, whether you're in a community college, a four-year institution, or spend some of your time, as many of you will, in the private sector. Okay. On pages 157 and 58, Banks presents a philosophical gestalt that we all need to think about. So look at that carefully. And again, we're moving into something which is now very current. It was talked about in the 70s and it disappeared. Go back to my first module tape when we talked about that which goes around comes around. We're now talking about a transformational environment. And frankly, our leadership course is based largely on transformational leadership, and you'll be introduced to that. Many of you, I suspect, have already either been induced to it theoretically or worked with transformational leaders. At least I hope so. So he presents some very, very good stuff. He presents a very interesting challenge for you. I'm looking at pages 161 and 162. If you have performed the tasks that he suggests on those 2 pages, you will certainly find what he suggests useful if you are involved in any aspect directly of teaching and learning, or more importantly, but with all your interpersonal interactions in the context of the community college setting. Okay, so now we'll move on to gentlemen who you will see in Module 2. You will see him again in Module 4. And you will also see a lot of him when you're in your leadership course, and that's a gentleman named Terry O'Banion. Dr. O'Banion began his career at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. From there, he went to the League for Innovation for Community Colleges in the late 1960s, did that for a generation, literally, and is still operating as we speak today. And this is about, where are we? We're just about the end of September of 2019. So he's been around a while. He's still writing, he's still articulate, and as I say, you will do well to heed many of the wonderful things that he says. He talks about the personalistic side of Banks' algorithm, but I think you could look at it. Now, of all the 5 elements of the learning college that Dr. O'Banion presents, and he's important, a little aside for a moment, perhaps the most powerful approach to this whole idea of an environment, organization, institution, whatever, becoming a learning one, started at MIT with a gentleman named Peter Senge. And I think you will be introduced to Senge again. Even if you're not, I suggest that you look him up in the spare moment. I hear the laughing. You have no spare moments, I know. But this is something you need to kind of add to your repertoire. Okay, so he has, O'Banion has these 5 that evolve out of this whole idea of a learning environment. The one that is most important is something that you're going to have some getting over. American society is a deductive learning process, and that's one of our problems. If you talk to people from Japan or Korea, or even if you talk to people from the Middle East, I've been privileged to work with them, and Morgan with a group of Saudi Arabian students. Perhaps they're more aware of how important community colleges are to ever-changing and expanding cultures than we are. And they've been in connection with us for a number of years. It was sad with that very unfortunate situation with their crown prince. We're not as close to them as we were, but I hope that that will come back, as they're a wonderful group to work with. But what they're learning there, in a culture that's thousands of years old, much older than our own, the whole idea of changing the way of thinking. And that's really an amazing thing, because I've had Saudi students before where the women could not go anywhere without a member of their family accompanying them. I've had Saudi students that I taught for an entire semester, and all I ever saw of them as a human was the space in their headpiece that shows their eyes. Everything else was covered. And now women can drive. Women can become educational leaders. That's why they're sending them here. And Morgan is a very popular location. We have had contracts with them for years. And we've sent a number of very, very capable ones over back home, and that's been a wonderful thing. So, establishing a different mindset, a way of looking at reality, which will draw upon your personal life experiences. Remember his algorithm, personal life experiences, as well as, it's kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. How do you fit the old life experiences into the new gestalt that makes up the 21st century? Okay, we will be looking at this perspective throughout the course because it underscores much of what goes on in the educational experiences you'll have while you're at Morgan. And at least half of the community colleges in Maryland's 16 institution, with many more campuses than that, is based on this new way of thinking, the learning environment. So hope you've enjoyed this. We've got a lot more discussion to go on. We have 60% of the course still to go, so persevere.